Okay, everybody, we are live. Chat's already rolling. Scott, Beth says, I'm a huge dork because I missed Photoblab so much and it's my first back in Florida. Ooh, hold on. Let me turn off the air conditioners in here so we don't have that hum. Sorry about that. Almost forgot to do that. So how's everybody doing? Welcome to, I don't even know what we call this show anymore. Photoblab, Studio Blab, Blabbity Blab.
Studio Blab, I think.
Yeah. Beth is here. Scott's here. Photo Pro Know-It-All is here. Peter is here. Jay is here. It's a good crowd tonight already.
Yep.
And we're going to start the show like we usually do. Like to know what you guys have been up to, photographically or otherwise. And we'll also share. Oh, Judy's here too. Hey, Judy, how's it going? So, Mark, what have you been up to this week? You had some exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, it was actually pretty busy week for me. Actually, it was on the Saturday that just passed. I did a corporate event. It was actually for the company I work for, but they hired me through my company, not as an employee of their company. So
okay,
that worked out well. So basically, it's not part of my paycheck. I priced it as I would normally price a regular job. So therefore, I made some decent money on it. And then also on Monday evening, I hosted here in my studio. We did a small a workshop. Basically, I hosted it, and my friend was sort of doing more of the teaching part of it because he's used this stuff and I haven't used it. So it was just sort of a learning for me, but I didn't really go into. I didn't take a lot of photos with it because I was sort of helping out more than anything. But basically, what it was for is this stuff here. It's called atmosphere aerosol, and it's basically the same idea as a smoke machine, but it comes in a can. So you basically take it anywhere, spray it, and it works well for backlit situations, and just adds a real interesting atmosphere into your photos. So
in fact,
it was kind of fun.
Let me show them the photo you sent me. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. And while we're doing that, we got to say hi to a bunch of other people who've just joined. We've got, let's see here. Let me scroll up so I can see. Hello, Herman, and Sandy is here, and Steve and Christopher. And is Naraya with you too, Christopher? If so, hello to Naraya. I'm waving to the wrong place. You guys can't see me right now. And Stan, hello, Stan, and Andy from the UK, and Abby. Hello to everyone. Oh, and Vincent's here too now. Awesome. And Penny. Hey, Penny, how's it going? And Mark, oh, God, we got a big crowd tonight.
We got 35 watching so far, and we've just started.
Awesome sauce. So I'm bringing up Mark's photo here just to show you guys real quick. This is what he's talking about, this atmosphere stuff. You can see the background. You can see the shafts of light because of that aerosol spray that they sprayed. And I will say this. I've tried to use a smoke machine in the past to achieve this same sort of thing, and it was a giant pain in the butt. And it didn't work very well. It seems like this stuff is tailor-made for doing this kind of shot that Mark has here. So I actually was looking it up right before we jumped on live, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to buy some of this stuff. And we got Sony Shill Lanier Phony A9. That seems like a dig at what's his name?
Jason.
Thank you, Jason. Hey, yeah. Chris Delroy from CRD Photography. Hello and welcome. And Taylor France. And wow, Charles Molt, first time here as well. Welcome everybody new. So we've got a bunch of new people. Before we jump into everything, I do want to say this. Questions are welcome. This is about us sharing and everybody learning together. So photography questions of all kinds are welcome. We do have a topic for tonight's show, which is about metering modes, and we are going to spend the bulk of the evening talking about that. But if you have a question that's not related to the topic, feel free to ask. We're happy to answer those questions. And on that note, Jeff has a question about the Pentax K50, which is the camera that he has. And I reviewed this camera quite a while ago. If you dig back into my video archives, you'll find it in there. And he's wondering about how well it fares shooting a bar band because he's got a job or a shoot plan to shoot a band live. And the K50 overall, when I tested it, I found that it performed very well. One of the toughest things about shooting bar bands and just bands in general is that you've got really contrasty light typically because you're in some kind of environment that is typically a pretty low light situation, but then you're going to have the band, which typically has some sort of bright spotlight type lights on them. And when I tested the K50, it generally performed very well. The focus on the K50 is not the fastest focus in the world. So that's probably going to be the place where it will struggle the most. But I do recall when I was testing it, because of the very contrasty light, it actually focused quite well for me. And at higher ISOs, I found the K50 to perform pretty darn good when you're shooting up at 16 and 32 and even 6400 as I recall. So I think, Jeff, that you'll be fine with that camera shooting the bar band. He said he's going to bring a 17 to 50 f2.8 and a 50 millimeter f1.8. That is exactly what I'd recommend. Start with the 17 to 50 and see how well it handles. If it's not a wide enough aperture, then just pop on that 50 millimeter and work with that. And I'm sure you'll get some fantastic shots with it. And Mark, is there anything else you want to add?
Nope, I think that pretty much covers it.
Awesome. Yeah, Sony Show Lanier says Pentax makes good cameras. I absolutely agree with that.
I kind of agree a little bit too, considering I'm a Pentax shooter.
right. You're a K1 shooter. So
yeah.
The Valkyrie and Terry. That's Terry. See, I remember now that it's Terry. And I know PETA's planning on joining too, but PETA said probably be late because of demanding teenagers. So let's get started talking about metering modes. The metering modes are a little bit confusing on your camera. And in order to talk about metering modes, you first have to talk about the camera meter, okay? Because inside of your camera, there is a module of some sort. And this module is designed to analyze the scene to try to figure out what the proper being in quotation marks, exposure of your scene should be. So essentially, the camera's meter, this module that analyzes the light as it comes into the scene, or it comes into the camera, this is essentially the key to the brain of your camera in terms of measuring the exposure. And the very first thing we want to understand is just how the camera meter works, separate entirely from the metering mode. So we're not going to talk about the metering modes until we understand how the camera meter itself works, okay? Sony Shill says Sony makes cameras that overheat. That's definitely been a problem, although there was supposedly some, guess what I just found? I just found a piece of balloon from the photo shoot I did on Monday stuck to the wall over there. So the A9 actually apparently isn't actually overheating. Those were apparently like false alarms coming out of the A9, but other Sony cameras definitely have had overheating problems.
Yeah, I think there was a firmware update that fixed that, if I remember right.
Yes. Larry just joined us. Hello, Larry Crane. Thanks for joining us tonight. So what I want to do is explain how the camera meter works. I got a hide Mark's photo here so you guys can see the photos as I shoot them for the demonstration, and then explain what the camera meter does and demonstrate it. So the camera meter evaluates the light that comes into the camera, and it feeds the brightness values of the light in the scene to the computer inside your camera. And this is going to sound a little confusing, but here's what you got to understand. When your camera meter looks at a scene, it does not see in color. It is only interested in measuring brightness values. So if you look at these three cards that I'm holding up right here, these represent a range of brightness values. You essentially have 100% bright, which would be clean, pure white with no detail or information. And then you have 50% bright, which is represented by this middle gray card right here. And then you would have 0% bright, which is represented by the black. Now, when your camera sees a scene, what happens is the light from that scene bounces off all of the different subjects in the scene, and then it goes into the camera's lens, and the meter reads all of the different values across the scene. For instance, if you have the sun in the scene, that's going to be like 100% bright. If you have a person with, skin, because most people have skin, right?
I believe so. Last time I looked, I have it anyways.
Right. Skin reflects at about 50% bright. If you have somebody wearing dark clothing, like I'm wearing right now, this is going to reflect at 0 or close to 0% brightness because of the black fabric. And all of that data is going into the camera. Now, what it does with this data is what gets a bit confusing about the camera meter. See, the camera meter has one goal and one goal only. And that goal is to take all of the brightness values in the scene and average them out so that the average comes out to 50% bright across the entire scene. And when I say across the entire scene, I don't mean that the entire scene would come out as this gray or as this 50% bright value, but that the average value of all the brightness values in the entire scene would average out to 50%. Now that sounds a little confusing, so I want to actually demonstrate it. But let's check out the comments here first. So Jeff, Jim is here, and hello, John Hazlett, welcome as well. Vincent says Sony has issues in warm and hot climates, which run much longer than 30 minutes. That's very, very true. And hello to Selena as well. All right, so if you have any questions, let's see. Sandy says, sometimes the meter is off for me and my pictures are dark. Why? Sandy, that's hard to answer without knowing a bit more about what might be happening or without an example photo. So if you have an example photo handy, Sandy, that you could send to me on Facebook Messenger or send to Mark, so that, well, and then Mark would have to send it to me.
Yeah,
either way,
send it to you.
Yeah, if you can get me the photo, then I can take a look at it and try to figure out why the meter was screwed up, because there are certain situations where the meter is going to be stupid. So Larry's got a question that we are going to get to, which is, does it matter which metering mode you choose with flash photography? We're going to get to that when we get to metering modes. First, let's just look at how the metering mode works. Okay, so I'm going to bring my subject back into the scene. And I'm going to take a photo of the subject, and we're going to look at this and discuss how the metering mode works. I'm going to show you some stuff on the computer that hopefully you'll see as well. I need to take this off because right now we're not going to be using flash. Flash comes in at a later point. So all this stuff can be off. And right now, to shoot this at a 0 exposure, let me see what the camera's going to tell me. Right now I'm at 1/250th f8 and ISO 200, and I'm getting like, it's way underexposed because this is what I normally shoot for flash. So I'm gonna go to f2.8. I'm at shutter speed of 100, and I'm gonna pop my ISO up to 800. Now, before I do anything, I need to change one more thing that I'm not really gonna talk about because I don't wanna muddle the situation.
Because it's a secret.
Well, it's not a secret. It's just something that I don't want to introduce yet because it's not worth talking about yet. Just because it'll muddy the water.
It'll take us way off course.
Right. Okay. So at ISO 800 and a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, 1/125th, it's telling me that my exposure, the camera meter feeds. Okay. Let me back up for just a second here. The camera meter takes the information and feeds it to the camera. The camera gives you that average of the information, the average of all of the light values, and it expresses it on the camera meter on your camera. So you have that range. You have 0, +1, +2, +3, 0, -1, -2, -3. Okay. So when you have your camera settings set and you point it at a scene, when your exposure indicator is reading 0, what the camera is telling you is that the average of all of the brightness values in the scene will come out to 50%. And the camera thinks that's the correct exposure. So it's telling you that the exposure will be at 0, or a quote unquote perfect exposure for this scene. Okay. If you are over or underexposed, if it was say at +2, then what the camera is saying is that the brightness values aren't at 50% here. They're actually at something more like 75 or maybe 85% or something, whatever. We need to turn down the amount of light coming into the camera because it's too bright. That's like warning, warning, too much light. That's what the camera is saying. So I'm going to take this photo here, and then we're going to look at it in Lightroom. Let's see here. Sony Shill makes a good point. Some camera companies do underexpose the images a little bit on purpose to protect the highlights. That's a good point. And then Steve says, could also depend on what metering mode, and some cameras will slightly over or underexpose in certain conditions. Exactly. Hey, IME says, can you do an example of setting the exposure with a gray card? Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, most of the time with the exposure being either slightly low or slightly high, it's usually a lot of it has to do with perhaps not what you're actually photographing, but the background. So if you're doing a person.
Yes, and we're going to get to that as well.
Right.
All right. So, oh, hello, Rajesh. Hello, hello. And hello, Polino. All right. So let me bring this image in. And right now it looks horribly yellow because I didn't white balance the image. So I'm just going to very quickly white balance it here in Lightroom just so we don't have to deal with that horrendous color. We'll go basic and just grab and bang it off the background. Okay. So now I want to bring this out because when I hover the mouse over the image, you guys can you guys see on Mark, can you see, I hope everybody can see the histogram up here at the top of the screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
And hopefully everybody else can see it as well. Because when I hover over a point in the image, you should be able to see the R, G, and B values expressed as a percentage. And when I move the mouse around the image, you can see the percentage value, the brightness values for R, G, and B. And that's telling us how bright these particular points are based on you know, the RGB values in the image. So what does that tell us? This is going to help us illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. You guys can't see me, so I apologize for that. But like on the background here, you can see that the RGB is basically 60% across the board. It's actually 60% red, 60% green, and then 59.7% blue. It's basically 60, 60, 60. And that's because there's essentially no color cast. That's not a white background. It's a little bit brighter than 50% gray. Okay. And then if we put the mouse over the black shirt, take a look at that. You've got red is 1%. Green is 0.9% and blue is 1.2%. Basically 1% across the board, perfectly black. There is some detail there because it's not at 0%, but it is close. And that's an accurate exposure of the shirt because it should be black. And if we look at the skin tone, depending on which part we put at, it's registering here on her forehead, it's 40% across the board. Well, not quite 40% across the board. There's a little bit of variance there. 40% red, roughly, 37.5% green, and 32% blue. I'm rounding up just for ease here. And if we go up on the forehead where there's the highlight, you can see it's 71% across the board. And if we go like down here on the cheek, the skin is coming in at 40%, not quite 50, but pretty close. So what's happened here with this is that the variance of tones in the image, pure black, some middle tones in the head, and some pure white tones or brightness values in the background gave the camera enough information to correctly expose the image. And it works this way because generally speaking, and this is a generalization, this is not a hard rule, but generally speaking, this means that this is this way because most of the stuff you will photograph will have a variety of tones from pure dark to pure light with a variance in between. And generally speaking, that is enough information for your camera to correctly expose the image based on this averaging of values to 50%. So that's how the camera meter works. So we're going to pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions tonight. And while we're doing that, I want to check the chat. So let's see. CamBiz says, I use manual mode and 90% of the time I ignore the metering values with no issues. So CamBiz, when you say that, let me ask you this. You say you ignore the metering values. Now, does that mean that you are not using your exposure indicator at all? Or does that just mean that you're over or underexposing based upon what you want onto the scene? Because everybody uses If you are using your exposure indicator, then you are using the metering values that the camera is giving you.
Yeah, because it's possible that he might be, I don't know what camera he has, but if it's a mirrorless camera, he could just be literally going by what he sees on the screen, because it will adjust as you adjust your exposure. So he might just be basing it off of literally what he sees.
Right, but even then, you're still using the information that's being fed to you by the camera meter, because that live view, if you are using live view, that is still a representation of the information that the camera meter is fed to the camera, and the camera has translated into the exposure you would get if you take the photo with that live view preview. So metering mode and your metering modes are still connected, but it confuses people because manual mode, did I say metering mode and metering modes?
Anyway, yeah, you said, yeah.
I did. Manual mode still relies on the camera meter. Manual mode just means that you as the camera operator have ultimate control over the image.
Yeah.
All right. So the 50% average is the thing that confuses most people, and it confuses people because they'll take a picture of something that is outside of the norm of what the camera expects, and then they don't get a result that they expect. So I'm not sure if Sandy was able to send a photo or not. I'm going to check real quick my messages on Facebook to see, because if she did, then it'll be a perfect example. Nope, I don't see a photo from her. So when you take a photograph that is an outlier as compared to what the camera expects, that's when you will get an image that is over or underexposed compared to what you were expecting the photo to be. And this will be a perfect example. I'm going to take Lisa out of the scene. Terry says, I don't know what modes to choose, when and why. We will talk about that. And the reason I'm taking Lisa out of the scene is because we're removing some of the tonal variation that I used to demonstrate that first shot. And in this next photograph, what's that?
So just removing a variable, basically.
Exactly, removing some variable, some data. And the next shot is just going to be a photograph of the white background. Now, our brains tell us that this is a white background. And so our brains tell us that when we take a picture of that white background, that it should be white. But that's not going to happen, okay? Because if your entire scene is, or even a majority of your scene is comprised of values that skew closer to 100%, then what's going to happen is the average is going to come out to 100%. And when the camera sees that average of 100% brightness, it's going to say, whoa, 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 slow down. That's way too much light. You need to turn this stuff down. And if you listen to that and you set your settings so that your exposure indicator goes to 0, you're going to end up with a photo that is gray, even though your subject is white. And I'm going to show you that right now. So as of right now, I need to set my settings to 1/200th of a second to bring that exposure back to 0. And that tracks about right, because when we looked at the values of the background with Lisa in the shot, it was running at about 60% brightness, which was close to gray, middle 50%. And that makes sense because you had that variance of tones and you have all of the subject dark, middle, and light. But now we've got an entirely light subject. And if we expect it to be light, we're going to be unhappy with the resulting photo. And it's about to come up here. Yeah.
And again, Sandy said she deleted all of her photos.
Okay. So here is the photo of the white background. And if you look at the values, it's not exactly 50% because there's always going to be variations. As somebody said, you know, your camera's manufacturer might make some slight changes, whatever. But if you look at the tones, we're at 46% across the board. This is basically middle gray.
It's almost the same exposure as the last one.
It is. It's almost the same exposure as the last one. But in the last one, that was to be expected because we had this other varying information, and this was calculated into the exposure.
Yeah.
Along with this, and all of that contributed to that 50%. But in that shot, this wasn't the subject. So we weren't really looking at this for the exposure to be white necessarily. We'll talk about that as it relates to flash photography, because that's something that also throws people. But we were looking at the subject here, the person, Lisa, my friend, in the shot, and we had black and we had skin tones that came out correctly because the camera had the right information. So I want to check with the chat and see, because we got a lot going on here, and catch up with what questions we might have or what people are saying, and then we move on from here. All righty. So chat's going a million miles an hour tonight. Pop out. So Mark, did you see any questions that you want to highlight?
Most of them are comments at this point of the game.
I used to get, so yeah, we got a nice crowd tonight, which is wonderful. Charles says no hard rules in photography. That's 100%. Chris says I'm probably 2 people because my phone's for the chat and then the computer's on the full screen. That's awesome.
Oh,
so Steve says
our numbers are skewed horribly now.
Steve says I use it to get as close to correct and then adjust to what I want as a shot. That's exactly what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sandy says I believe him because they're 2 Bart. Canvas says I use a D5. I do start with initial metering value, then I override and ignore the later meterings. I adjust according based on the histogram. Okay, so that's what I was talking about, right? So what Canvas is doing is exactly what Steve just said too. You are using the meter when you're doing that. You're still using the information that comes from the camera meter. You're just not going to 0 and what the camera says is correct. And that's what we should be doing as photographers. We shouldn't necessarily go to 0 and just take the photo. You need to make the creative choice to say, is this the exposure that I want? Is this what I want the photo to look like? And if it's not, then you make those adjustments.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. So Steve says, let's see, which mode do you find yourself using normally? Where are you reading the values? Okay, so I'll come back to that. Lisa looks like Spyros' twin. I should put a shirt on her. Okay, so look over at the Lightroom window down in the corner. And in fact, let me do something here so it's easier for everybody to see. I'm actually enlarge Lightroom and have Lightroom take over the screen for a moment here. So I'm just going to move it to the right spot. There we go. Okay, so here's Lightroom right here, and hopefully that's what everybody sees.
Yeah, we can see it. Well, I can, so I'm assuming everyone else can.
Okay, hopefully the Chrome comes through properly. So this is the image, and up here at the top of the right-hand panel, you have this histogram. And then when I put the mouse over the image, underneath the histogram, there's an RGB value of the color brightness value. So that's what I'm talking about. And I apologize, I should have switched that earlier too, because down in the corner there, it was probably pretty small and pretty hard to see. But this is what I'm talking about. And I'll leave it up there for another moment so you guys can see it. Let's see. But I think we're about ready to talk about the modes themselves, because this is what a lot of people are starting to talk about. And that's good, because that's where we wanted to move. So yeah. I'm going to move Lightroom back so that you guys can see the photos as I'm taking them. And then, boop, there we go. And then switch back to the other shot so you guys can see that.
Yeah, Sandy made a comment about the photos that were coming out dark. She said she was shooting, I guess, inside, and there's a bright window behind the subject. So,
that's exactly what I suspected was the case. But I didn't want to make an assumption. So now let's talk about the actual metering modes on your camera and why you would choose, or why you might not even bother to choose a different metering mode. And this is where people can get confused and a little bit hung up. So just I'm just going to run through them on my camera because it'll be easiest as a reference. So most cameras have 3 metering modes. Some cameras may have 4.
Yeah.
And there are 3 basic types of metering modes available.
And the different brands might call them slightly different things, but
yes, but they all operate. Exactly. Give me just a moment here. I've got an alarm going off on my phone. I'm going to have to shut it up or it's going to just keep going on me. I apologize for that. Shush, shush. There we go.
Reminding you about Photo Blab.
Actually reminding me to post my photo to Instagram tonight.
Oh.
Okay, so There are three basic types
don't
of
mind my
metering
waving hands. So I'm being attacked by a fly.
modes. Augustine says, I use a Pentax K50 and like to use spot metering to measure the part of the photo I'm wanting to expose for, but just as a guide, then a change is needing. Exactly. We're going to get to that exact technique. So the first and default metering mode on every camera when you take it out of the box is zone or matrix or evaluative metering mode. And this mode works by looking at the entire scene that the camera can see and evaluating the whole scene, all of the brightness values in it. Now, how it evaluates it is actually proprietary to the manufacturer, right? So Nikon has like multi-zone metering and it slices it up into like 47 pie shapes or some crap like that. And it uses their proprietary, Nikon magic juice to determine that, these 3 slices should have, more weight in the exposure calculation because of whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they all have their own different proprietary method, but the zone or evaluative or matrix, the default metering mode on your camera will look at the entire scene and essentially try to balance out the entirety of that scene.
Yeah.
How well it works is going to vary depending upon the situation you're shooting in. And this is the case for every single metering mode. And this is where people get hung up. So we're going to get to what to do and why you shouldn't get too hung up on the metering mode.
Yeah.
The next...
Some will work better in certain conditions.
Right.
But it's a matter of knowing how they work and how to work around the downfalls of each type.
Exactly. So the next basic type is the center weighted metering mode. And Mark, do you want to describe that one?
Which one? Sorry, I was attacked by the fly. What mode was it again?
Center weight.
Okay, yeah. So center weight is similar to the first one, except it doesn't evaluate the whole scene. It's sort of more, again, depending on the camera manufacturer, it more takes like the center area, but not just the dead center. It's sort of probably about a third to half of the scene, but in the center, not the edges. Right.
So it's looking at the center, and it does, depending upon the manufacturer. This is a throwback to the first metering modes on cameras in the days of film, but it prioritizes what's in the center of the frame, because this is like a generalization, and we've actually talked about this when it comes to composition, right? But very generally speaking, very generally speaking, people tend to put the most important thing in the picture in the center. So when you point the camera at the scene, the idea behind center weighted was the thing that's in the middle is what should be exposed properly, and don't worry so much about the background. If you can manage the background, manage it, but if not, just forget it.
Yeah, ignore it.
Right. And again, like these things are designed, to be kind of idiot proof when we say this. It's trying to make this as simple as it can possibly be to try to make taking pictures foolproof, because as we've all learned, picking up these cameras and trying to become better photographers, it is not as simple as picking up the camera and pressing the shutter button. And this is one of the things that complicates it. Now,
they just try to be as intuitive as possible, basically.
Yes, that's what they're trying to do. And props to the companies for doing that, right? Like, I have no problem with that. But with greater understanding, we can become better photographers. So then the last one is spot metering. And Mark, if you want to explain that one as well, go right ahead.
Sure. So the spot meter is literally, it just takes the center. I don't know the exact size of it, but it's basically as close to the center as it can possibly get for reading your exposure. So basically, you get it as narrow as possible without any background or middle ground stuff coming into the reading that it's taking.
Exactly. And my understanding is it's a roughly 3% to 5% area in the center, very center of the image.
Yeah,
very center of the frame, rather.
Right. And again, I guess it's going to depend on the manufacturer as well, too. But
yeah, it's going to depend on. That's why it's a variance, like 3 to 5%. So we've got a couple of questions. So Terry says, say you're taking a photo of a black dog in the snow.
well, I know how I do that one.
Yeah, and so here's what could happen, right? And it's going to depend. Let's say you're taking a picture of a black dog in the snow, okay? And the dog is, 10% of the frame. And the rest, the 90% of the frame is snow. If you're using evaluative metering mode, okay, the default mode on the camera, what's going to happen is the same thing that happened when we took this picture of the background. Yes, there are some dark values in that shot because you've got the dog, which takes up about 10% of the frame. But 90% of the frame are values that are closer to 100%, which is going to skew that average way closer to 100% than it would to 50.
Yep.
Now, on the other hand, if the dog is about 50% of the frame and the snow is about 50% of the frame, then you'll probably get a great exposure because 50% black and 50% white is going to average out to 50%. Boom, you've got a great exposure. And then if you go the other way and the dog takes up 90% of the frame and the snow takes up 10% of the frame, then what's going to happen is the snow might actually be closer to white, but the dog is going to be gray because when you take all values skewing towards 0, that's going to cause the camera to move those values up towards 50%, making the blacks look gray in the image.
Yeah. I think if you actually were in a situation like that, this would be the case of where you'd want to have your camera in full manual to get your exposure set. So therefore, as the dog's moving away from you and further away where the camera might misinterpret the exposure, then you've got it locked.
Yes, I just had to peek out the door. It looks like it might be storming out soon.
No.
Okay, now this case gets precisely to the choosing a different metering mode and why you might choose different metering modes, but also why you might just ignore the metering mode entirely. Okay, so we just explained how all three work. The evaluative evaluates the entire scene using special proprietary magic sauce for each manufacturer, but it tries to make the best exposure possible using all of the values in the scene. Center weighted is kind of like a portrait mode, which is what Beth asked. Because generally speaking, if you're taking a portrait, again, very generally speaking, you would tend to put the portrait subject in the center of the frame. That would get the priority in the averaging of the values. And then the spot is going to look at that teeny tiny spot. So if you put the spot on my nose, it's going to use my nose and only my nose and nothing else. If you put it on my eye, it's going to use my eye. If you put it on my shirt, it's just going to take the black of my shirt. It ignores everything else.
Yeah, I think that would probably would have been the ideal metering mode for Sandy with her person at the window.
Yes. So what we're going to do now is a comparison. I've got model Lisa, and I've got an LED light. And I'm going to turn the LED light on, and I'm going to turn this up all the way. So that might be a little bit bright, but this is going to allow us to demonstrate the difference between the metering modes. I'm going to take the first photo on the evaluative metering mode and let the camera just do its thing. I need to adjust this ever so slightly to frame them a little bit better. I could just move the camera, but whatever. Hey, Nazar is here as well. Let's see. Chris says, do you just ignore metering for astrophotography? Kind of, yeah. You kind of do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not exactly an answer, but you kind of do. Okay, so I am now going to set my exposure to 0 based on the evaluative metering mode, which is the metering mode that I'm currently using on my Olympus. And I'm going to take the photo, and we have a very bright source of light, and we have a subject with dark tones and medium tones, and a little bit of the backdrop is in the shot. And when I take this photo, I hope I'm right. What I predict will be that Lisa my model friend here, who needs a shirt that says get out there and take some damn photos, will be underexposed fairly dramatically, because this very bright light is going to skew the metering mode, the metering values towards 100%, because that is so bright. Hey, Candy's here. How's it going, Candy? Okay, crossing my fingers that I'm actually correct. Okay, it actually did an okay job, honestly.
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad. She is underexposed, and when I say that,
definitely is underexposed. But
yeah,
I think if the light had been brighter, it probably would have underexposed her even more.
So let's do that. I have a second LED light, and I can bring that one in. I wasn't sure if one would be enough. I was going to test this earlier, but then I thought, no, let's just do it live and let's just see what happens, so people can see the sausage as it's made, so to speak.
Yeah.
But what I do want to do quick before we do that is just compare the two photos. The very first one we shot of a quote-unquote proper exposure without the bright light in the background. Let me white balance this one real quick too, though. D, bring those tabs in. Okay, there we go. And you should be able to see a dramatic difference in the exposure, right? On the right-hand shot, the model, the mannequin, is quite nicely exposed. With that LED light in the background being as bright as it is, she is definitely underexposed. And that's because of the skewing of the values based on that bright light. So let me bring a second LED light in, and we'll see how much of a change and how much of a difference that makes. I need a flash foot here. Which mode are you in right now? Right now, Larry, I am in evaluative, which, again, depending upon your manufacturer, it will be different. It could be, it could be zone on Nikon, I think, evaluative on Canon. I think it's also evaluative on Pentax, but it's the default metering mode.
It's the one I don't use.
Right. It's the one you don't use.
Right.
Okay, so here's the other thing to consider. I'm actually going to make another change. I'm going to move the lights further back, okay? Because with the lights as close to Lisa, some of the light is actually spilling onto her, allowing her to not be quite as underexposed. So I bet just by moving this light back and not adding another light, it'll change the exposure and she'll be more underexposed. I might be wrong about this. I hope I'm not. Yeah, she's definitely more underexposed, I think. No, it's basically the same. But you guys get the idea. I'll take one more with the second light in the shot just to see.
Stupid flies.
Is that fly just coming at you?
Yeah. Glad he's not a mosquito, or I'd have welts all over my face from him stinging me all the time.
Right.
That would be hot and sexy.
Yeah. So it didn't make too much of a difference, but the model's definitely underexposed, and that is because of the evaluative metering mode. So I'm going to take this light out because it really doesn't make any difference. And I'm going to put this one back, and we're going to take, yeah, I'm bouncing light off the wall too. You're right, Jim. These white walls. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to take one more evaluative shot. So again, we have a reference of each shot. Everything's identical in terms of framing. And I'm just going to change the metering mode in each shot. And then I'll reset the exposure to 0 based on what the metering mode tells me. So the shot that's about to come up is evaluative metering mode. Now let me switch over to center weighted. And with center weighted, come on, focus properly, would you? There we go. I'm not changing the framing at all. And I'm not sure how that's going to impact because she's not exactly in the center of the frame. But I expect center weighted is going to be quite similar to, evaluative.
Yeah,
and that's typically what happens. Now we'll switch it over to spot. And this is where we should see a dramatic difference. Now, I need to move the spot so that it is definitely on Lisa. So
yeah,
I'm putting it,
center.
yeah, I'm putting it on her cheek. And now it's telling me that the image is underexposed by 1 stop. And that's a change because the center weighted, I didn't have to change any exposure settings. It still told me it was at 0. But with spot on her cheek, now it's saying, well, that's underexposed by 1 stop. So I'm going to change my settings and take this next shot, and it should be a stop brighter. And it is. You can see the difference. Honestly, you know, depending upon how you evaluate a shot yourself, it still looks a bit underexposed, but you can see the difference in the metering modes and how it reads the scene. So the question now is, like Terry said, like, which metering mode should I choose, and in what situation and why? So, Mark, why don't you explain your philosophy first, and then I'll back up with mine.
Okay. Well,
I gotta grab my water.
Well, I guess first of all, I'll actually just sort of mention what I use. 90 to 95% of the time, I just use center, like not center weighted, but actually center spot, just because I like to be able to have as much control over my exposure as possible. So therefore, if I know what I want to meter on, I can just point the camera at it, whether it's the sky or whether it's the ground, and go from there. You could probably do the same thing with center weighted, just not as accurately as you do with the center point, and probably the time you might want to use the larger one with the whatever it's called, I don't remember, but the larger one that evaluates more of the scene, like most of the scene. That would probably be something, if I was to use it, would probably be more in a landscape situation where I know the lighting is fairly even to start with. But
right,
again, like I said, I never use that mode anyways. I'm 95% of the time center, and I would just pick a spot in my scene that I want the exposure to be set to, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, yep. So my philosophy is similar. I use spot metering all the time. I never change my metering mode except for right now when I did this demonstration. Otherwise, it is always and forever 100% of the time on spot metering mode. And here's why I use spot metering mode. So first, most of the work that I do is flash photography work. And I actually don't really even need the metering to be in spot for that. All I care about with flash photography 99% of the time is that I can black out the room I'm working in. And I know how to do that. All I do is I set my ISO to the lowest setting. I set my shutter speed to my sync speed, which is 1/250th. We've talked about this before. And then I set my aperture to, you know, what I want for depth of field, which is typically around f7.1 to f9. And that almost always blacks out the room. And then it doesn't matter what the meter tells me after that, because I'm actually working with my flashes and changing my flash power to change the exposure of the subject based on the light from the flash. So yeah, for me,
the flash is sort of the one time where the metering modes don't really take into account.
Yeah. So for me, the meter is only good for making sure that I can see that my exposure indicator is telling me, yes, I'm at -3 or -4 or -5, to the point where I know that my scene is going to be underexposed in terms of the ambient light before I start bringing in my flashes. Now, I do not 100% of the time always shoot flash. It's about 99% of the time. Sometimes I do things like shoot MMA fights where I definitely am not using flash. And occasionally I'm testing a camera and I go do a bar band test where I'm definitely not using flash. In those cases, I still use spot metering. And here's why. Because I know with certainty that when I put the center spot on the subject, that spot is what I'm going to be metering for. So Jay is going to that concert and he's going to be photographing the band, and the band is probably going to be under very harsh light, and the background and the other surrounding areas are probably going to be pretty dark because that's typically a band situation.
Yeah.
Because of those harsh lighting and very contrasty lighting situations, if you were to use something like evaluative or even center weighted, it is entirely possible that the exposures that you're going to get, and when I say exposure, I mean like, the readings on a camera and the shots you get as a result, if you go to 0, it's entirely possible the exposures are going to be garbage. They're going to be either way underexposed or way overexposed because you had very bright light sources contrasting against very dark surroundings, and the balances are not even. Like if it was 50% light source and 50% dark areas, that might be okay, but that's not going to be the case. So your exposure is just going to go wild all over the damn place, and you're going to get inconsistent and not really good shots of your band. But if you use spot metering and you put the spot on the band member that you are trying to shoot, or even just one of the band members if you're shooting the whole group of them, then you're going to get a good exposure for that band member, because that's the only reading you're taking, and you're ignoring all of the other lighting in that situation. Now, I don't shoot much landscape, but even when I shoot landscape, I still leave it in spot. And
yeah,
you could say that that's not a good idea. There are probably lots of landscape photographers that actually use the evaluative or the matrix, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I still leave it in spot because I know how it's going to respond. And here's the thing. When you're using any metering mode, whether it's spot, whether it's center, whether it's evaluative, you just do what everybody has already said that they're doing, which is the exact same thing that I do, which is you take your initial reading of the scene, and then you take a test photo, or you look at your live view, or you look at your histogram, or however you evaluate your exposure, and then you adjust it. And if you don't like the exposure, you over or underexpose it until it looks the way you want it to look.
Yep.
So it's important to understand how the camera meter works. And it is important to understand how your metering mode works. So if you choose a metering mode, you can predict how it will respond to a particular situation. But the metering mode isn't all that important, because if you're in manual, you just adjust your exposure to what you want it to be, regardless of the metering mode.
Yeah. Nazar has a question. I hope I pronounced that right. He says, on my Canon 100D, I had the option of taking a shot by tapping the touch screen instead of pressing the shutter button. And his comment is, I think it meters the spot where I touch screen, and he's asking if that's right. I don't think that's right. I think it's still, depending on the mode you're in, I think that the touching just focuses, but I'm not 100% sure.
It varies from camera to camera. And that goes back to a question that Terry had too. I think it was Terry, which is, does the metering mode change how it works if you're using the viewfinder versus using live view on your screen? So I'll answer Terry's question first, and then we'll talk about Nazar's question and piggyback off what Mark just said. And to answer Terry's question, no, it doesn't change. Whether you're using your live view or whether you're using your viewfinder, the meter is going to receive the same amount of light, and it's going to spit out the same information to the camera, and the camera is going to do the same calculation based on whatever metering mode you happen to be using.
The light is the light is the light.
Exactly. The light is the light is the light. How you see it might be a little bit different, because in the viewfinder, if you have a DSLR, you're just seeing the scene. But if you're using live view, then you might actually be getting a live preview of the exposure. But
Plus
you're
it's
still,
backlit.
Yeah. Plus it's backlit. Oh yeah, because it's an LCD screen.
Yeah.
but you're still, the light is still the light is still the light, as Mark said. Now, to Nazar's question, you've got to check your camera, because different cameras have different sort of extra special metering options. As an example, we talked about how spot metering uses that spot in the very center of the frame. But on some more advanced cameras, or some cameras that just have better options, you can actually link your metering spot to your focus point. And then what that would mean, if you have this option, that would mean that if you use single point focus mode, and only if you use single point focus mode, then whichever focus point you choose, that becomes your spot, which means you don't have to point the spot at the subject to get your reading and then recompose to focus and take your shot. You can just meter and focus and everything all with that single focus point. But I cannot tell you, yes, your camera does, or no, your camera doesn't, just because it's too varied. I know that, generally speaking, Nikon is better at having this as an option than Canon is. I think on Canon, there's maybe one camera that allows you to do this. It's like the 5D. It might even just be the 5D Mark IV, or it might not even be in the 5D series. It might just be the 1D. But on Nikon, I believe like the D750 can, the D800 series can, definitely the D5, and possibly even the D7000 series cameras allow it. You'll need to check your manual to see if that's possible. Now, to the touch screen on the 100D, you would have to check your manual. I can't answer that. A way to test it is to set up a situation like this, where you have the scene like this, where you have a very bright subject and then you have a not so bright subject, and touch the focus point on the dark part of the scene and see what the camera meter tells you, and then touch the point on the brightest part of the screen. And if your metering reading changes when you touch the different parts of the screen, then I would say yes, that touch point becomes the spot that is metered. And that's typically how smartphones work. So this may be something that's leaking into cameras with live view and touch screens. But if you touch different spots and your exposure reading stays the same the whole time, then it is not linked to your touch point. It's just stuck at the center if you're using spots, or whichever mode you happen to be using.
Yeah, that's a good idea for a test. I like that.
Yeah. And so I already answered Beth's question, which is, does your focus spot change if you're using like a spot focus in different metering modes? Actually, I didn't really answer that question. So your focus point and your metering spot are two different things that on some cameras can be linked together. So this is something that can confuse people, and I need to try to make this as clear as possible. Your focus point is always going to be your focus point, and changing your metering mode will have no impact whatsoever. It will have no effect whatsoever on how your focusing operates, or what focusing point you choose, or anything like that. The metering mode has no effect whatsoever on focus points and focus performance. But if you're able to link your spot metering to your focus point, then if you do that, and only if you activate this option, and it could be active by default on certain cameras, again, you need to check your manual for this, then when you use single point focus mode, where you move the focus point and you choose just one focus point to be the active one, then your metering point will move with that focus point. And that will change how the camera reads the scene based on what the lighting values are in the scene and where you put the focus point in there. Because when you move the spot, it's going to only read that one single little bitty spot. So I hope that answers the question. So in a nutshell, with metering modes, all you really need to do is, in my opinion, all you really need to do is pick one and set it and forget it. Because if you're shooting in manual mode, or even if you're shooting in a priority mode, like aperture priority or shutter priority, all you need to do is look at your exposure, take your test shot if you need to, or look at your histogram, and then adjust your exposure. The benefit of doing something like choosing spot metering is that you're always going to be able to look at that center spot, or again, your focus point if you link it, and know that if you put that focus point on a particular point in the scene, that you're going to get a correct, again, based on the camera's brain, a correct exposure for that exact spot. And that's something that's going to allow you to point it at a subject that is backlit, and know for sure that, yeah, I'm going to get this well exposed, even though I have this bright light. And it might take you one or two less shots because you understand that you've already chosen spot metering mode, and you know that by putting the spot on the main subject, you're going to mostly ignore or entirely ignore that light in the background. And that's really all it boils down to.
Spyros, I sent you a link that Stephen Land sent me.
Okay.
The link is too long to put in the chat, so I don't know how to shorten. So you can either shorten and throw it in the link or open it up on the screen if you want. It sort of helps explain some of the different metering modes.
Okay.
Looks informative.
Oh yeah, I've got a thing like this too, but let me shorten that link real quick and then I'll pop it into the chat. So this is what Mark is referring to right here. Where did my chat go? There it is right here. So, oh, it didn't shorten the link. That's the hell. Hold on a second. View image. Let me do this. Okay, now it should work. There we go. Okay, so Charles said, oh, Nazar, thank you very much for that super chat. That is very, very, very much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 3 plus Strafe says, doesn't the meter expose and you get mid-gray or something like that, so you have to adjust your exposure anyway since you're going to get a gray scene? Yeah, that's what we were talking about when we started the show tonight. The fact that the meter is always going for that 50% average brightness value for the entirety of whatever it's metering, whether it's that spot or whether it's the whole scene. And that's why we as photographers need to understand that we can adjust our exposure based on the results that we want. But the other thing that's helpful in knowing that is then knowing if you go into a scene where, again, like let's say you're taking a photograph of a snow scene and you know you don't want your snow to be dingy and gray and nasty looking, you want it to be nice, bright, and white, then you can know going into that shot that you're not going to want to expose at 0, because if you expose at 0 on the exposure indicator, your snow is going to come out as gray because all of those white values will skew it. So before you even take a shot, you can just go to +1 or maybe even +2, depending on the scene, and take your shot there and be one shot closer to your ideal exposure with nice bright white snow rather than dingy gray nasty looking snow. And the same goes for if you're taking a photograph of a predominantly dark subject that you actually want to preserve those dark tones for. You might say, well, this is almost entirely black, and I want to preserve that black. I know my camera's going to try to shift that to gray, so I'm going to underexpose this right off the bat by 1 or 2 stops in order to get a better shot right away.
Yeah. So somebody, I don't remember who it was, somebody had asked earlier about using the gray card, if you could demonstrate.
Oh yeah,
getting the meter reading with the gray card.
Yes.
With the camera.
Yeah. So the idea is, if you want to get, this is with an ambient light exposure. You can't really do this with flash, I don't think. Yeah, not really. Well, maybe. And what you do is you take a gray card like this and you put it in front of the subject in the light that you're shooting in. And then so I've got the spot right here on the nose, okay? And if I do that, let me just see right now, because I moved the light, it's telling me that my exposure is at +2. I'm at ISO 400, or ISO 400 at 2.8, or ISO 800, shutter speed of 400. So this is difficult to do. I'm going to tape this to her face.
I'm sure she'll appreciate it.
Yeah. But I need it held in place while I'm at the camera. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Charles says, will chat still be seen after the program is over? Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't preserve the live chat after the program is over. It might be possible to watch the video and have the chat play while you watch the video, but I don't know 100% if that actually works or not.
Yeah, I know, not in YouTube, but that the other one that you start using for your
Twitch.
Twitch. It replays the chat.
Okay, so this is like super ghetto, but I'm taping this gray card to Lisa's face, making her look like a photography pirate. And I'm going to put the spot on the gray card. And this is essentially the method you would use. And what this is doing is it's actually, you want to use spot metering for this, okay? If you're going to use a gray card, you want to use spot metering, because the gray card isn't going to help you if you put it in the middle of a landscape scene that's a huge scene and the gray card takes up you know, 1% of the frame, and you're using evaluative or center weighted, because that 1% that's the gray card in the middle of this giant scene, it just isn't going to be enough to skew the values and give you the reading that you want. But if you're on spot, then you put the spot directly on, excuse me, the card in the shot, okay? And then you take your reading, and it's telling me that I'm overexposed by almost 2 stops. It's 1 2/3 stops. So I'm going to just take my ISO down, 2 stops, almost. There we go. And now it's telling me that I have a correct exposure for the gray card. And because the gray card is in the light that I'm photographing, it doesn't matter if what's behind the gray card is light or dark or anything else, because I put the gray card in the light that I'm photographing, letting the exposure indicator see the tone that it wants to average and average that tone for me. So now taking this off, I should be able to take a photo and have it be correct. But here's the thing. Now, because I took this thing off, my exposure indicator actually tells me that I'm overexposing by 2/3 of a stop, because now it's reading off of her cheek. But the cheek is a false value compared to the 50% gray. So what I need to do is ignore that and just take the photo. And in theory, this should be correctly exposed for her face. And that's like spot on, honestly.
Yep.
That worked the way it was supposed to work. Hallelujah, it worked. I love it when I do these demos and they don't work. So, oh, Terry's looking to borrow $7,000 so she can get a 1DX.
Yeah.
So that's the idea behind a gray card. Now you can get bigger gray cards if you want. This is a small little card kit that I have, which is really handy for you know, for taking with you. It's something you can just throw on your neck, you know, and then run around and shoot with it. And if you're shooting a subject that, like a person as an example, you can just have them hold it. If you're shooting a scene, you would just need to like tape it or prop it or set it in the scene somewhere. The key to using a gray card to get perfect exposure is to put it in the light that the subject is in. It's not going to be any good if, for instance, I have this light off and then I use the gray card to take a reading here like this, and then I set my settings and then I turn this on, because by turning this on, I've changed the light. So you have to put it in the light that you're photographing in, and then use your spot metering and put the spot right on the card. And here you want to set your exposure to 0 because you're feeding the camera 50% gray, and you want it to be exactly 50%. And that should bring everything else in your scene right in line in terms of exposure. And it works great.
Bonus tip.
Bonus tip. Go for it, Mark.
If you actually take one picture with that gray card on her face, you can also use that for setting your white balance. Yes,
absolutely, 100%. So let's do that. Let's make her Pirate Lisa again. And also, just in doing this real quick, we should be able to take a reading on the in Lightroom, and that should come out at 50% value across the way. So I'm going to reset everything because I've changed some of the values.
Move crap around and
yeah, I think I might have changed the light. And then after this, we'll have to wrap it up because I know it's after 7. So this one might actually be. Yeah, see, this one's pretty underexposed in terms of Lisa, the subject, right? And I changed the angle of the light and the angle of the card a little bit. This card might not be the best option because it's actually a little bit reflective, like because it's glossy versus an actual card. But what I want to show you real quick, again, let me try to get over here, is if we look at the values over the card, yeah, they're actually reading a little hot. They're reading 75% roughly. So it didn't work ideally the second time around, but it gave us a good result the first time around. Excuse me. So I hear we're starting to GoFundMe for Christine to buy a 1DX.
For Terry.
Or for Terry. Sorry, yeah. That's what I meant.
But then they also want to start a GoFundMe for hair for Lisa.
Oh, for Lisa's hair. That's funny. You guys are hilarious. I had a wig for her once, but okay. So if you want to know more about metering modes and how the meter works, I've got a series of videos that explain this. I'm going to drop that into the chat right now. While I'm doing that, if you guys have any questions you want to ask them now, and we'll try to answer them real quick before we go. I have a light meter here, a handheld light meter, and you can use this to sort of do the same thing that I did with the gray card, but it's easier because you just put this in the scene and then you take a reading with it. But we're not going to do that tonight. We're going to go over how to use a light meter, a handheld light meter, next week. And we also didn't get to flash with the metering modes, but it doesn't really make. We'll just have to try to get to that next week if we have questions regarding that. So Chris says, what time do you guys normally start live streams? I've never made one before, but I'm Melbourne, Australia time zone 10. It's 10:11 a.m. right now. So what time is it for me? It's 7:11. So for you, Chris, on Wednesdays, we would start the live stream at 9 a.m. on Wednesdays. I also live stream on my Twitch channel when I do my live edits and stuff like that. And if you go to twitch.tv/Heniadis, you can see my schedule there. Let me get you guys that metering set of videos real quick. I got to go to my channel and then find my playlists. And are there any questions coming in? Hopefully we answered the questions that everybody has.
I think for the most part we got everything. Just sort of comments going back and forth now.
Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna pop this link into the chat, and then we'll wrap this baby up.
Charles wants red hair for Lisa.
Yeah, so I do want to say thank you everybody for joining us. Also, at that playlist, at that link for my metering mode videos, I also have a metering mode cheat sheet. There's a link that you can download that has the information that Mark had, but it's actually expanded to cover more manufacturers. And it also discusses what the different metering modes do and different scenarios where you might want to use a different type of metering mode if you want to understand that better. And that's something that's free. If you're already signed up to my mailing list, you just enter your email and it'll take you right to the download. If not, I do ask that you subscribe to my mailing list, but if you don't want to be subscribed, you can just unsubscribe right after you get it. Totally understand, that's fine. So otherwise, thank you everybody. Nazar, thank you very much for that super chat. We appreciate that. Hey, IME says, does the gray card method with flash work the same way? We'll have to get into that next week. So we'll put that question and we'll tackle that first. Because introducing flash complicates things a little bit because you have to separate the ambient light from the flash. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week to demonstrate how to use a handheld light meter, both in terms of regular photography and flash photography. Everybody have a great week. Join me on my Twitch channel if you want to see me live edit. And Mark, you want to add anything before we wrap this baby up?
Nope, don't think so.
All right, thanks, everybody.
It was great.
Have a great night, day.
Night, everybody.
Get out there, take some damn photos. We'll see you guys next time. Okay, the 1 minute after show while I try to find my stop button. There it is right there. All right, this is official. Good night, everybody.